April 14th, 2026, 11:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Right now, at the edge of the North Cascades in Washington state, there is a number that scientists at the United States Geological Survey and the Washington Department of Natural Resources are monitoring with a fixity that borders on obsession. That number is 0.4 inches per hour. Not per day, not per week, per hour. This is the critical velocity, the red line. It is the movement speed of an unstable summit block on a peak known locally as the Sentinel, a jagged 8,000-foot monolith standing guard over the Skagit River Valley. If the GPS sensors bolted into the brittle rock register 0.4 inches of displacement sustained over a 60-minute window, it signals that the final irreversible collapse sequence has begun. At that velocity, the physics of gravity and friction shift into a runaway state. Authorities will have approximately 48 to 72 hours to clear the valley below before 260,000 cubic meters of mountain, roughly the volume of 100 Olympic-sized swimming pools filled with solid dolomite, descend in a catastrophic rock avalanche. Currently, the movement rate is 0.4 inches per day. That is 60 times slower than the emergency threshold, a fact that offers cold comfort to the teams in Vancouver and Seattle watching the telemetry. Because the mountain is moving. It has always been moving. And what the high-density seismometer network installed across the summit is recording right now is not stability. It is the slow, measurable, and terrifyingly rhythmic preparation for a total structural failure. Geologists describe the situation with a clarity that is unusual in a field often defined by million-year timelines. This is not a hypothetical scenario for the next century. It is not a question of whether the peak will fail. It is only a question of when. The Sentinel has been the defining landmark of this region for generations, often called the Matterhorn of the Cascades for its sheer, pyramid-like profile. For a century, hikers climbed the King's Cleaver route, a path that wound through what is now a strictly enforced death zone. That route has been shut down for years, barricaded by the National Park Service. Yet, just 48 hours ago, there were reports of peak beggars attempting to circumvent the closures to stand on the summit one last time before it ceases to exist. The response from the USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory was blunt. To stand on that peak right now is to gamble with your life. You could be standing on a summit that simply disintegrates beneath your feet without a second of warning. That is not hyperbole. That is the current geophysical assessment of the most dangerous rock face in America. The anatomy of the impending catastrophe is written in a fracture that defies the scale of human engineering. This crack, bisecting the summit of the Sentinel, is currently 130 feet deep, 115 feet long, and gapes 20 feet wide at the surface. It is a geological wound that was first documented by surveyors in the late 19th century, and it has never stopped growing. According to the latest high-resolution laser scans from the Washington State Department of Natural Resources and the USGS, the gap is widening by a baseline of 2.5 millimeters every single month. But what is happening inside that dark, vertical abyss right now is what makes the spring of 2026 the most critical moment in the mountain's recorded history. As we move into mid-April, the Cascades are experiencing a rapid seasonal transition. The winter of 2025 to 2026 left a significant snowpack, and that frozen reservoir is now liquefying. Snowmelt water combined with heavy spring rains is infiltrating the 130-foot deep fracture, saturating the interior of the peak. In the brittle dolomite that forms the Sentinel, a rock type defined by its lack of elasticity, this water is a lethal lubricant. But it is also a hydraulic jack. When nighttime temperatures at 8,000 feet drop below freezing, that water expands by 9% in volume. In a fracture this deep, that expansion generates thousands of pounds of pressure per square foot. Every freeze-thaw cycle acts like a slow-motion explosion, wedging the two halves of the mountain fractionally further apart. The technical data is unequivocal. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a lead geophysicist with the USGS, notes in a March 2026 internal briefing, "The mountain is no longer reacting linearly to environmental stress. We are seeing a profound decoupling of the summit block from the main massif. This decoupling is measured by an extraordinary array of instruments. Since 2014, the summit has been wired like a patient in an ICU. 6 seismometers are positioned around the primary fracture at 40-meter intervals. GNSS stations track the block's position with millimeter precision, and fiber optic strain meters measure the internal tension of the rock. The seismometers are recording something bone-chilling. The mountain is singing. As internal rock stress increases, the natural resonant frequency of the summit changes, much like a violin string that rises in pitch as it is tightened. The sensors register a distinct sawtooth pattern. For 5 to 7 days, the frequency climbs as the rock resists the pull of gravity and the push of ice. Then, in a period of less than 48 hours, the frequency drops sharply as the rock partially yields, microfracturing and creeping forward. Cycle after cycle, the mountain groans under the load, and as we approach the final collapse, these cycles are becoming shorter. The mountain is literally counting down. At 7:22 a.m. on March 12, 2026, during a period of heavy atmospheric river rainfall, the GNSS network recorded a sudden 1.2-inch displacement in just 6 hours. This wasn't a collapse, but a surge event. It confirmed what the complex computer models at the University of Washington had predicted. The rock is already failing in stages. During heavy precipitation, the movement rate of the unstable section increases 5 to 6 times above its baseline. We are not looking at a static threat. We are looking at a system that is primed for acceleration. The danger isn't just to the peak itself, but to the coupled systems of the Skagit Valley below. If 260,000 cubic meters of rock, the acutely unstable zone, sheds all at once, the kinetic energy will be equivalent to a small tactical weapon. The debris will not just fall, it will flow. It will hit the valley floor and move with the fluid dynamics of a high-speed slurry, potentially damming tributaries of the Skagit River or severing Highway 20, a critical artery for the region's infrastructure. The USGS uses the word acutely for a reason. This is not a precautionary watch. Failure conditions are present now. The balance has tipped. Think of the tree analogy. You can cut through the trunk for an hour, and for 59 minutes the tree stands perfectly still. Then the final fiber snaps. The 0.4 inches per hour threshold is that final fiber. At that speed, the internal friction of the dolomite is overcome by the mass of the block. Once reached, there is no physical force on Earth that can stop the sequence. The countdown is no longer in years or months. It is in the very water currently seeping into the heart of the stone. To understand the sheer scale of the threat looming over the Skagit Valley, we must look to the ghosts of American geological history. The United States is no stranger to the sudden, violent reorganization of its landscape, and the data from the Sentinel is echoing the warning signs of past catastrophes with haunting precision. In June 1925, the Gros Ventre slide in Wyoming saw 38 million cubic meters of debris, far more than what is currently perched on the Sentinel, drop 2,000 vertical feet in less than 2 minutes. That event created a dam 225 feet high. When that dam failed 2 years later, it wiped the town of Kelly off the map. At the Sentinel, the volume is smaller, at 260,000 cubic meters, but the proximity to infrastructure and the sheer velocity of the projected Sturstrom, or long run-out rock avalanche, creates a risk profile that is arguably more acute. The scientific community is currently reeling from the Alaskan lesson of 2025. Just last year, a massive rock slope failure in the Chugach Mountains above a remote fjord in Alaska delivered a chilling blow to existing forecast models. For months, USGS monitors had tracked the slope, expecting a multi-stage collapse, a series of smaller shedding events that would bleed off the mountain's energy gradually. This is the ideal scenario, the one that emergency managers at FEMA and the Washington Emergency Management Division are praying for at the Sentinel. But in Alaska, the models were catastrophically wrong. The acceleration phase, which was predicted to last several days, compressed into a matter of 4 hours. The mountain didn't shed in pieces. It failed as a single cohesive unit. The Sentinel researchers are now forced to monitor with this Alaskan compression in mind. They are hoping for a staged release, but they are preparing for a total instantaneous failure. The projected 2 to 3 day warning window, derived from the 0.4 inches per hour threshold, is a calculation based on historical averages. But the 2025 Alaska event proved that rock physics can be brutally unpredictable. Underestimating speed is a recurring theme in landslide forensics. We saw it in 2014 at Oso, Washington, where a hillside that was considered a known hazard moved with a speed and volume that completely overran the established risk maps, claiming 43 lives. The Sentinel is Oso's older, harder, and much higher brother. The physics here are governed by a principle known as the inverse velocity method. Scientists plot the rate of movement on a graph. As the collapse nears, the curve spikes toward infinity. But the Sentinel presents a layer of complexity that pure mathematics struggles to capture: the hydrostatic wedge. Because the crack is 130 feet deep, it essentially acts as a massive vertical pipe. During a heavy Washington rainstorm, this pipe fills with thousands of tons of water. This creates two distinct forces. First, the physical weight of the water pushing the crack open, and second, the pore pressure within the rock itself, which reduces the friction holding the two halves together. This is where the coupled system becomes terrifying. It isn't just a rock problem, it's a hydrological and seismic problem. The Pacific Northwest Seismic Network, PNSN, has noted that even minor, imperceptible tremors from the nearby Cascadia subduction zone could serve as the final trigger. In 1959, the 7.3 magnitude earthquake at Hebgen Lake, Montana, triggered a rock slide that moved 28 million cubic meters of material in seconds, burying a campground and creating Earthquake Lake. What the data at the Sentinel shows is a system reaching criticality. The 140,000 cubic meters that fell in previous events between 2016 and 2021 were merely the preamble. Those events didn't stabilize the mountain. They removed the toe or the supporting base of the upper summit block. Imagine pulling the bottom blocks out of a Jenga tower. The 260,000 cubic meters remaining are now cantilevered over thin air, held only by the residual shear strength of the internal dolomite fractures. The latest 2026 models from the University of Washington's Geomorphological Research Group indicate that the factor of safety for the summit, a ratio of resisting forces to driving forces, has dropped to 1.04. Anything below 1.0 is a total collapse. We are standing on the razor's edge of a single percentage point. The mountain is no longer a permanent fixture of the Cascades. It is a temporary structure whose lease is about to expire. For the people living in the shadow of the Sentinel, the geological data isn't just a collection of graphs. It is a visceral, haunting presence. Sarah Miller, a senior monitoring technician with the USGS, spends her shifts in a reinforced mobile command center parked 7 miles down valley from the summit. For Sarah, the singing of the mountain isn't a metaphor. She hears it through her headset, a low-frequency grinding that the acoustic sensors translate into a sound like a distant, agonizing groan. "You don't just see the displacement on the screen," she says, her voice steady but weary. "You feel the weight of it. When the sawtooth pattern shortens, the air in the trailer feels heavy. We know that every millimeter of movement is a step toward the total loss of the valley's landscape as we know it. Sarah is the one who monitors the 0.4 inch per hour threshold. She is the human element in a system designed to detect the moment physics overrides hope. If that alarm triggers, Sarah has exactly 90 seconds to initiate the automated emergency alert system that will override every cell phone and radio frequency from Marble Mount to concrete. The human cost of this geological inevitability is exemplified by residents like James Mac Mackenzie, a 72-year-old rancher whose family has run cattle in the Skagit Valley for 3 generations. Mac's homestead sits directly within the maximum debris flow zone mapped by the US Army Corps of Engineers. For Mac, the mountain is a neighbor that has turned hostile. My grandfather watched that crack through binoculars in the 20s, Mac says, standing on his porch and looking up at the jagged silhouette of the peak. He used to say the mountain was just stretching, but now you can hear the rockfalls at night. It sounds like a freight train coming off the tracks up there. When Skagit County Sheriff's deputies issued the first voluntary evacuation notices in early April 2026, Mac stayed. Like many in the valley, he is caught between a deep-seated connection to the land and the cold, empirical reality of the USGS reports. The logistics of the impending disaster are a nightmare for Chief David Chen of the Skagit County Emergency Management Division. The Sentinel's collapse isn't just a local rockfall, it is a regional infrastructure killer. Highway 20, the North Cascades Highway, is the only major artery through this section of the state. If 260,000 cubic meters of dolomite hit the valley floor, the highway will be buried under 30 feet of debris, effectively cutting off the Upper Valley communities and the North Cascades National Park headquarters. The estimated cost of debris removal and highway reconstruction is pegged at $180 million, but the indirect economic impact, the loss of tourism, the severance of the power corridor, and the disruption of local commerce could easily push the total damage to over $450 million. Then there is the power grid. Seattle City Light operates a series of hydroelectric dams downstream, including the Ross, Diablo, and Gorge dams. While the dams themselves are engineered for seismic events, they are not designed for the massive sediment pulses that follow a mountain's disintegration. A rock avalanche of this scale would send a pulse of fine rock flour and sediment into the Skagit River system. This isn't just dirty water, it's an abrasive slurry that can scour turbine blades and clog cooling intakes. Engineers at the Diablo powerhouse are already operating under pre-event protocol, which involves clearing essential equipment and preparing for a total grid decoupling to prevent a catastrophic surge if the mountain takes down the high-tension transmission lines that span the valley. The psychological toll on the community is documented in the frantic calls to the National Park Service and local dispatch. In the last week, over 50 reports of unusual booming have come from hikers and residents. These aren't echoes, they are microseismic events, the sound of internal structural beams of the mountain snapping deep inside the dolomite. For the rescue teams of the Skagit County Search and Rescue, the mission has shifted from recovery to denial. They no longer enter the primary impact zone for any reason. We've had to tell families that if someone goes up into the restricted zone on the peak, we are not coming for them, Chief Chen explains. The risk-to-benefit ratio has hit zero. The mountain is the one in charge now. As the spring melt accelerates, the valley waits in a state of high-tension stasis. The schools in the lower valley have practiced tsunami-style evacuation drills, anticipating not a wave of water, but a wave of rock and earth. The local telecom hubs have been reinforced, and FEMA has pre-staged emergency satellite arrays in Burlington, knowing that the fiber optic lines running beneath Highway 20 will be among the first things to go. This is the reality of living beneath a peak that is acutely unstable. It is a life measured in millimeters and monitored in real time, where the difference between a normal Tuesday and a regional catastrophe is a movement rate of less than half an inch per hour. The data is clear, the sensors are live, and the people of the Skagit Valley are left to watch the summit, knowing that the Matterhorn of the Cascades is preparing for its final, thundering descent into history. The eventual collapse of the Sentinel will not be an isolated tragedy. It is the most heavily scrutinized example of a phenomenon occurring with increasing frequency across the mountainous United States. From the unstable slopes of the Alaska Range to the crumbling peaks of the Sierra Nevadas and the weakening granite of the White Mountains in New Hampshire, the stability of the American landscape is being reassessed in real time. The monitoring network at the Sentinel is building a scientific legacy that will outlast the mountain itself. When the summit finally gives way and the data confirms it will, the terabytes of seismic and GPS data gathered in these final months will change how rock collapses are predicted from the Rockies to the Appalachians. We are watching the birth of a new era in geophysical monitoring, where the seeing of a mountain is no longer a mystery, but a precise diagnostic tool for evacuation. However, the future risks extending from this event are not confined to the Skagit Valley. The Sentinel is a bellwether for what engineers call corridor vulnerability. Throughout the Pacific Northwest and the Intermountain West, critical infrastructure, fiber optic cables, high voltage transmission lines, and interstate highways are pinned between steep, geologically active slopes and rising riverbeds. A study by the United States Bureau of Reclamation suggests that as these aged mountain structures fail, the resulting sediment pulses will fundamentally alter the hydrology of the American West. In the case of the Sentinel, the 260,000 cubic meters of dolomite won't just stop at the valley floor. Over the coming years, that material will be ground into a fine silt, transported downstream into the Skagit River Delta near Mount Vernon, and eventually into the Salish Sea. This sediment loading threatens the sensitive spawning grounds of the Chinook salmon, a cornerstone of the regional ecology and economy. It also complicates the maintenance of deep water ports and irrigation intakes essential for the Skagit County agricultural sector, an industry valued at over $300 million annually. Looking toward 2027 and beyond, the USGS Landslide Hazards Program is identifying sister sites, peaks with similar fracture geometries and hydrological stress profiles. The Cascades chain reaction is a hypothetical but plausible scenario where the seismic energy released by a major rockfall or the shift in local mass balance could trigger secondary failures on adjacent stressed slopes. We are moving into a future where the stability we took for granted in the 20th century is being stripped away by the raw physics of rock dissolution and hydrostatic pressure. The Matterhorn of the Cascades is the warning shot. It is a reminder that while we can map the cracks, measure the millimeters, and model the fluid dynamics of the debris flow, we cannot negotiate with gravity. The emergency threshold of 0.4 inches per hour remains the most watched number in the state of Washington. It is the dividing line between a world where the mountain stands and a world where it falls. The crack is 130 feet deep. It gets a little deeper every day. The water continues to infiltrate. The freeze-thaw cycles continue to wedge, and the seismometers continue to record the shortening sawtooth cycles of a mountain in its death throes. The data doesn't lie, and it doesn't blink. We are witnessing the slow-motion disintegration of a landmark, a process that began in the 19th century and is accelerating toward a 21st century conclusion. There is no intervention possible, no rock bolts, no drainage tunnels, no engineering feat can stabilize a 250,000 cubic meters of detached dolomite. All we can do is follow the data, heed the sensors, and step back. The peak is moving. It has always been moving, but now it is counting down. Drop your state or city in the comments. Have you ever seen a cliff, hillside, or mountain face collapse near where you live? What was the aftermath for your community? Include the location and what you remember about the event.